Hey y'all, in today's video I'm going to take you on a step-by-step process how to make these delicious all butter pie crusts from scratch. You can make them by hand, or I'll show you how to use a food processor for a quick and speedy pie crust version. So you can go right past the frozen pie section because you know you have homemade pies all ready to go in your freezer. Stay tuned for the full video. Hey y'all, welcome back to In the Kitchen with Baker Girl. Thank you, Jesus. It is another beautiful day to be in the kitchen, and today we're going to be making pie crust. Now, a good foundation for a pie starts off with a good crust, and I'm going to be making an all butter pie crust. So no shortening, certainly no packaged frozen pie crust. No, we want to make a good pie. We've got to start off with a good crust. Now I am using King Arthur's flour for this recipe. It's an all-purpose flour. You can use a whole wheat pastry flour if you want a whole wheat pie crust, but because that can get to more of what people think of a health nut pie, which there's nothing wrong with that kind of pie crust. I'm just going to be using a regular all-purpose unbleached flour, and I will be using King Arthur because they have a really good quality flour. I'm also going to be using a European style butter. Now in my butter episode, which I'll leave a link in the iCards, I talk about different types of butter. I also talk about different types of flour in my flour episode, and I will link those in the iCards, the link to those videos. But I'm going to be using a European butter because it has a higher butterfat content, which I talk all about that in my butter episode. But this is 82% butterfat, so you get a much richer pie crust. I'm going to be using some European butter. Also, because this is a sweet pie crust, I'll add a little bit of sugar and I'll add some regular salt. Now, I'm going to use my food processor because this is a double crust recipe that I'm going to work with. But no worries, if you don't have a food processor, I'm also going to show you how to make one the good old-fashioned way by hand. Now, I am going to be weighing this out, and I'm going to weigh everything out. The good thing about pie crust is, even though it's simple and easy, and it goes together, especially if you're using a food processor, it goes together very, very quickly. But you do want to make sure that everything is accurate. If you add too much flour, it can make your pie crust tough. So I know how much flour I need, so I'm just going to go ahead and start weighing that out. So I've got my scale on, and my bowl is to 0. Okay, so I'm going to start off with my flour, and I will leave the recipe in the description box below, so don't worry about it. Okay, let's go ahead and get our flour in. Let me have a look. I'm looking upside down. So I need 325 grams of flour. 327. Well, ain't that something? So I'm done with my flour. I can set that aside. Now I need a teaspoon of sugar. Actually, matter of fact, I'm going to use 1.5 teaspoons of sugar. Just sprinkle that right in. The sugar, you can leave the sugar out, especially if you know you're not going to be, like if you're making a bunch of pie crusts, and some could be for savory pies, some could be for sweet pies. Leave the sugar out. You don't necessarily need the sugar, and some recipes don't even call for sugar at all. The reason why I add it is because for these two pie crusts, I know I'm going to be baking pies, and it also makes your crust turn a nice and golden brown color. So it does help with the browning. Also, I'm going to add in a teaspoon of fine salt. There we are. All right, that's it for the salt and for the sugar. Now I'm just going to take a little spatula and kind of mix this around. There's no need to turn the food processor on at this point. Just toss it around. It'll all mix up when we get to when we turn the machine on. Now I've got my butter here, and I'm going to use 2 sticks plus 2 tablespoons of butter. Now this is cold. This is cold, unsalted butter. Don't use refrigerated butter. This is butter straight out of the freezer, so it's solid cold. And because we're using a food processor, it doesn't matter how the temperature of the butter. Now, if you're going to make this by hand, you do want refrigerated cold butter. That's just because your fingers get you'll have iron fingers after you try to, and I've done it, and believe me, it's not fun. So if you're doing this by hand, just make sure your butter is a tiny bit softer. You can also grate your butter in if that works, and then rub it in. But since I'm going to be using the food processor method, my butter is ice cold. Okay, let's check that. Now you can see how rich and golden this butter is. That's because the cows in Europe eat a very different diet from what our American cows eat for the most part. Especially, this is Irish butter. So these cows clearly eat a very, very rich diet. You can see because this butter is beautiful. So go ahead and get the last stick of butter in. Okay, get this on my food processor, lock it in. And now I'm going to start by just pulsing it backwards. Okay, so start off by just pulsing it a little bit. This is going to be noisy. What you're doing is just doing a couple of pulses. What you're doing is you're chopping the butter up before you start to completely incorporate it in. You get flour coated too. Don't worry about it. Okay. If you can't stand the mess, you have to get out of the kitchen. Okay, now once you got thoroughly coated in flour and your butter is chopped up into small, you know it's pulsed into small pieces, so it can take about 10 to 12 pulses. Now you can turn the food processor on low and let it process for about a minute. Really, really incorporate it into the flour. You don't want any big chunks or anything. Okay, now let's check on it. You don't want any, actually, matter of fact, let me set my scale aside because I'm done with that. You don't want any large chunks or anything of butter. Always use a spatula when you're sticking your nose in here because you don't want to run the risk. Okay, and so I can see my butter is still in fairly large pieces. It's not quite small enough as I want it to be. I just use my hand. I'm coated in flour anyway, so at this point it doesn't really matter. She's already flour coated. This is what I mean when I tell people when I go out and I look fairly decent. They go, "Oh, you look so nice," and I'm like, "Yeah, this is typically how I look in real life, flour coated." Okay, now let's let it run on low for another 30 seconds. Very nice. That is exactly what we're looking for. I'm going to get cleaned up here in a minute, but I want to show you the texture. As a matter of fact, let me grab a spoon. That makes it a little easier. Show you what you're looking for. It should be nicely pulsed, and you shouldn't really see, I mean, you'll still see butter, but you shouldn't see large chunks of butter hanging around in there. If you still see large chunks, just let it go for a few more seconds. There we are. You know, you see some recipes where they tell you to leave your butter in big chunks. But depending on what type of pastry you're doing, you really don't want to leave it in big chunks because it can create, when you're making croissants, it'll create butter blocks, and then it's not a good idea. And all pastries start off with a foundation anyway. That's all similar to one another, butter and flour, and then you build up from there. So you don't want big chunks of butter in your pie crust. So let me get this off and get a bowl to put this in and get some of this flour off of me. Okay, so I've got some of the flour off, and I'm actually at this point, I'm going to put on a pair of gloves because now we're going to start incorporating the liquid ingredient into here. And I don't really it's best to touch as little as possible with your bare hands. Let's just go ahead and take that out. And it's very nicely mixed. It also has a beautiful yellow hue to it. That's just the European butter. Okay, now we need to add some liquid, and we need to add a little bit of vinegar. I like to add just a touch of vinegar. It helps my pie crust. Now, I've seen recipes where some people will do it all in the food processor, where they add the liquid in and keep pulsing it. I do not like doing that at all. And there's a couple of reasons why. Reason number one, I typically make very large batches of pie crust. So when you have a lot, and that my Ninja is fairly big, I can make up to 6 pie crusts in my Ninja. And then, so if you had all this butter, you got all this flour, then you're trying to mix the water in with it. You have a tendency to overwork the dough when you do it in the food processor. Now, if you do 1 pie crust, will you overwork it? Yeah, probably not. But when I go over one and I start to doing 2 or more, I just like to put it in a bowl and do it by hand. Not only because also I can monitor the texture better than having to stop the mixer, open it up, check it, give you a little squeeze, see what it's doing. Let's just do it in a bowl. And it's easier too because you can see what's going on. So I'm going to start off with about 1/4 cup of cold water, and I'm using cold bottled water. So that is 4 tablespoons. 1/4 cup is 4 tablespoons. And then I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of white vinegar. I love these little measuring spoons my auntie gave me. They're so cute. They're so cute. Okay, take a spatula and then just start mixing this together. You may or may not need more water. By the way, I want to say something really, really quickly that I forgot to mention in the beginning. My flour was cold. I put my flour for my pie crust, I put it in the freezer. So I'm starting off with cold flour, cold butter, and cold water. This is important, especially if you're baking in the summertime. You really want to make sure you chill everything. And before, say it's a really hot day, before you even add the liquid in, once you get your butter and your flour pulsed up, what I will do, especially if I'm making massive batches of pie crust, I'll just put that right in the freezer before I add the water to it. Let it get cold and then take it back out because it warms up very quickly. Even on even when everything is cold, it warms up fairly quickly on a hot day, especially the type of hot heat we had this summer. Okay. So get it mixed up. Thus far, I put 5 tablespoons of water in. The water can differ depending on the time of year it is. So right now it's fall and it's fairly dry outside and the humidity is fairly low. So I'm probably going to need a little bit more water. However, if it's a very humid day, you probably be able to get away with less water. Now, how you tell is, number one, I can look at it and tell I still need some water. I've been, I made a couple of pie crusts and I can look at this and tell I will need some more water. But just as a proof, pick it up in your hand, and if you squeeze it like that and then you push it, it falls apart, you still need more water. So, and I'm looking at this, I'm going to need about 2 tablespoons of water. 1 and 2. So now we're at 7 tablespoons of water. It's much better to add water a little at the time than it is to just dump it. Because even though, as I talk about how you weigh out water, like I say, flour changes a lot depending on the environment it's in. So never add all of the water in a recipe when you're making with pastry. Add too much water, and that's when you really, really, really go into it's not good. So just add only as much water as you need. All right, let's try it again. Pick it up in your hand, squeeze it, and then poke it. That's getting better. Now, I'm thinking that is enough water. Even though it looks very dry. Number one, the butter is still going to continue to moisturize this whole thing. So this whole thing, all of the flour is still going to start to pick up moisture from that butter, because butter is still it's still in the liquid category. Okay, so let me grab a pastry scraper. I'm going to use this one. Okay, clean everything off, and now I'm going to tip all of this out on my marble surface. Now, if you notice, I'm working on my marble today. That's because I'm working with pastry. Okay, so let's go ahead and tip this all out. Tip it all out. You can do this in the bowl, by the way. You don't have to put it on the board. You can do it on the bowl, but this is what I have my marble counter for. Okay, so take your fingers. Well, let me take this off first. Take the back of your hand, and we're not going to knead this dough at all. Don't knead. We're not going to knead it. We are simply going to press it into, and you see how my hand is literally just picking up layers of pastry as I go along. And there we are. Clean it off your hands. This is another good reason why you want to wear gloves. So stack it up like that into like a little pyramid, just like that. And you'll see it'll all come together. And then do that again. Do that again. There we are. You notice how the texture is already changing and starting to look like pastry. Now, take this mixture, put it into a square, and fold it over itself, just like that. Fold it over itself that way. Fold it over itself this way. What you're doing, you're starting to create layers in your pastry. And now take your hand and press it down again. You don't need any extra flour at this point. Just press it down again. There we are. All right, now, the first time we fold it this way. Now, this time we are going to fold down from the top. So fold it down, press, pick up the extra, fold it down, press, and there we are. And now we do the same thing. Repeat the same process, scraping off your bench scraper as you go. I like to get the crumbs. Now, take your pastry and rotate it just like that. And then just continue. Press it down. Press it out. Just like that. Press it out. And it's still nice and cold because this marble counter stays cold, especially once it hits something cold. It chills and it keeps it cold. Now, fold it in half again. You can do this, 2 to 3 times. You don't have to go too wide. We're not making puff pastry. So, I'm going to give it a flip over. There we are. And now press it down one more again. Don't overdo it at this point. Just do it fairly quickly. And then fold it in half and press it that way. Okay. And that's all. We don't need to do anything more to it than that. And you can see how it looked all dry, but it isn't dry at all. Okay. And this, scrape up those little bits. And there we are. Boy, it smells good. That butter smells so good. And that's pie crust. No more than that. You don't have to do anything else. Now, I am going to divide this in 2. Now, if you are making say you're making a double crust pie, and you want to do a lattice pie, well, your top crust is usually always smaller than your bottom crust because the top crust, and you just need the lattice strips to go on top. So your top pie crust is usually always slightly smaller. However, I'm not necessarily interested in making a lattice pie this time, so I'm going to divide this evenly into 2 pieces. And the best way to do that is to use a scale. Okay, so I've got the old scale back, and I'm just going to cut off a piece of plastic wrap because this just makes your life a little bit easier. Okay, so just cut off a piece of plastic wrap, and I'll explain why in just a second. So now I'm going to take my ball of pie crust, and I'm going to weigh it out. It's 728 grams. So I need to divide this into 2, and that is 364 grams. So let me split it in half. At this point, I'm just going to put a teeny bit of flour down just to stop my fingers from peeling the dough off. Okay, let's split it in half, and I said 364, yeah. Okay, we won't worry about it. Now, take your pie crust and just wrap it up like this. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the second one. And we're going to mold these into rounds. So just a bit more plastic wrap. Okay. We're going to mold these into rounds. The reason being, if you want something to roll out round, it will be easier to roll if it starts its life off as a round. So I'm just going to go ahead and do it like this. And get this extra flour off my board because you can make the paper somewhat plastic, somewhat dirty. Okay, just take it and just start to press it into round. Do this quickly. Don't overthink it. Don't overdo it. Just round. And roll it just like that. Weird. Okay. And this is ready. I'm going to do the same thing with the second one. This is ready to go in the refrigerator to chill. You do need to let it chill before you start rolling, because this is an all butter pie, and the butter, despite all the cold flour, the cold water, it still has started to melt and soften a little bit. So go ahead and put this in the refrigerator and let it chill for at least 30 minutes. You can let it chill for up to an hour before you start to roll it out. Now, while my 2 crusts are chilling, my 2 double crust pie crust is chilling, I'm going to show you how to make a single pie crust by hand. And you can double this. Anything more than that, though, and it starts to get a little difficult on your fingers. So I have the quantity of my previous ingredients. I just halved it. So half the amount of flour, the salt, and the sugar, and the butter. Here I've got 10 tablespoons of cold butter, and you can see I cut the butter up into small cubes. This just makes it a lot easier. The machine can handle those large chunks of butter, but my fingers cannot. And I know this from experience. I have tried to do that, and I wasn't thinking. I just whacked the butter in huge chunks, and then I went in. Now you can use those pastry cutter things, and I do have one, but I think it's worthwhile to see how to do it by hand. So let's try it by hand. This works because you may not even have one of those little handheld things. So if you don't, this is how you do it by hand. So first thing, just start to coat your butter in flour. And then you start rubbing, literally, just like that. Rub the mixture in between your fingers. This is going to take some time, but while you're doing this, you can take the time to count your blessings while you're doing it. It's a good opportunity to spend a little time in quiet. Unfortunately, today I can't do that, but you never know. Now, I say your butter should be soft because when you press it, it should be just like this. You should be able to pick up a piece of butter in between your fingers and push, and you get that nice little flake. So if your butter is very, very hard, or, it'll take a little bit more pushing, a little bit more finger power. Okay. And you just keep doing this until your mixture resembles the one that we did in the food processor. Now, there are some people who use 2 forks. Some people use 2 knives. Some people who use the grater. They grate their butter. All of that works. It really just depends on, number one, what you're used to. And number 2, what types of things you have to help you along in the kitchen, such as the pastry cutter, which is what the thing is called. And I actually might get that out and show you just in case you haven't used, because some of you overseas may not be familiar with the pastry cutter. I know a lot of people make their pie crust by hand like this. And because I couldn't resist showing you how the pastry cutter works, I actually went and got my pastry cutter. But this is the general idea for the pastry cutter. You simply just chop back and forth, and it just cuts your butter into little pieces. And this, okay, so that is pretty much how a pastry cutter works. And my mom used these when she made biscuits. But that's how you use a pastry cutter. All right, that's done. Now, give it a little shake, and if you have any large pieces, they'll usually come to the top. You can see whether they're pastry or they're butter. That is pastry, and it's all nicely incorporated. Okay. Now, the first pie crust, we needed 7 tablespoons. That was for the double crust. So I'm going to start off with about 3 tablespoons for the single. Okay. And just because I'm pretty sure we activated a good amount of gluten with all of that hand mixing, I will add half a teaspoon of vinegar. Okay. And then just mix this up. So at this point, everything is exactly the same. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to make this pie crust just like I made the other two. I think I'm going to add one more splash of water. That's good. And I'm going to wrap this one up and chill it in the fridge. And then once they chill a little, we'll be ready to roll out the pie crust. Now, while the pie crust is chilling in the fridge, let's talk about what you can bake your pie in, because that does matter. Now, here I have a standard glass 9-inch pie plate. It's a Pyrex. We all probably have a couple of these and have probably given away a lot of these over a period of years. And this one it's well used and it's very good. It's perfect for baking a pie because you can see through it, so you can see how brown your crust is getting. This is a good standard to use. However, because it's glass, if you're making ahead, say you want to make a couple of pie crusts ahead of time and then stash them in the freezer, and you can build your pie crust right in your pan. But this is good if you're going to use it immediately. Say you're just going to chill it, go ahead and bake your pie, and you want a pie this evening. This is good to use for that because it's standard. Fine. Here is another example of a glass pie pan. Now this is it's more decorative. It has the fluted edge and it's more of a stoneware porcelain type pan. I wouldn't put this in the freezer. I've never put it in the freezer. I know Pyrex is freezer safe, but these I've never used in the freezer. And when you're making pastry and you're blind baking a pie crust, which we will talk about, not in this video, but we'll talk about in a full pie video. I'll discuss blind baking. I've never taken these straight from the freezer and put them in the oven, which you would be doing when you're blind baking your pie crust. But if you are giving a pie, say you have new neighbors and you want to bring them a housewarming gift, or somebody's sick and you want to bring them a pie, and you're going to give them, like you're going to bake them a pie, you're going to give them the entire thing. This is very nice to use because you can just chill this in the fridge. Put your pie crust in there, chill in the fridge, and then bake it, and then just hand the whole thing to them. And they have a nice keepsake, a pretty pie tin, and they have a delicious, beautiful pie. Now, another example is, this is a tart pan, and this is a thin tart pan with a removable bottom. This is what you would use if you're making cheesecake, if you're making a tart, anything that doesn't need a fluted edge, because these pans that we have here, these lend themselves more so to that pretty decorative fluted edge. But these, however, because it doesn't matter with these kind of pies, you're just going to trim the pastry to the length of the rim of the pan, and you're not doing anything cute or decorative around it. And they have the removable bottom, so they're perfect for a cheesecake. And all you would do is once you're finished and you're ready to take it out, you would set something like this down and set it on there like that, and the bottom just comes away. This is a 9-inch, and then here I have a deep dish fluted pan. Now this one is more suited to if you're doing a pie that has layers in it, such as an almond tart, and at the bottom you would have the pastry, then you would put jam, like a Bakewell tart, which is very popular in the UK, and that's a tart that has multiple layers of filling in it. This you would use because you end up with a very deep pie. Now, in the South, where I am from, pies are usually not very thick and they're not very deep. The thickest pie is usually like an apple pie, but a sweet potato pie, a pumpkin pie, a pecan pie, they're fairly thin because they're fairly rich. So this is another example of a pie pan with a removable bottom. And then you have my favorite, which is just a plain pie tin. Now, why is it my favorite? Well, number one, when I make pie crust, like I say, I make a lot of them. And I can put my pie crust right in my pan. I can flute it. And then I can wrap this up and put the whole thing in the freezer. And it's ready to go. Whenever I want to bake a pie, I already have a ready-to-go pie shell frozen in the freezer. All I need to do is pull it out and start doing whatever I'm doing with it, which is essentially what you get when you buy it in the grocery store. You already have a ready-made pie already in the tin, and you just take it out and freeze it. The only drawback to that is, of course, these can break, which oftentimes probably happens for those of you who buy the frozen ones in the grocery store. You get them and the crust is all broken around the edges. So that is the only drawback to this. Another drawback that these can have is the bottoms cannot get as browned because the tin kind of reflects the heat and your bottoms don't get as brown. But that can easily be remedied by simply moving the position of where your pie is baking in the oven. So these are the two classic pie pans that we all probably are very used to. Just a plain pie tin. All right, pastry is chilled and it's ready to go. Now, one thing I do want to say, if you don't want to shape this into your pie tin and then freeze it, you can freeze this just like this. All you would need to do is just to, put it in a Ziploc baggie, label and date it, and it will stay frozen for up to 6 months. And you have a pie, it gives you a jump start, especially if you're making a lot of pies. So just unroll it. It's nice and cold. Don't let it get too cold. So, no more than maybe 30 minutes. If it gets too cold, your butter just goes back solid and then it becomes difficult to roll it out. So just kind of let it hit at a moderate chilled. Also, if it's a very, very hot day like some we had back in the summer, you can put your marble board in the refrigerator too. All right, now start off by, I'm going to move this out of my way. I like to start off by making a cross X into the pastry, just like that, just the X. And then go up and down, just like that, up and down. Rotate the pastry, do that again, up and down, and up and down. And while I'm doing that, I'm pushing out ever so slightly. Pushing out going that way, then I'm pushing out going this way. Do this again. Don't go over the edge. Going out that way. And then up it out this way. If it starts to get a little sticky, you can put just a little bit of flour on it. You can also, should be able to move it around easily. Do that again. And just do this until your pastry looks like it's ready to roll, which this looks like it is. Okay, now we start rolling. Roll from the center out. So roll out like that, and then turn it. Roll out again. Turn it. Make sure that you keep enough flour on the surface, but not so much that it starts to just slippy slide around. You don't want a lot of flour at this point. Keep rotating it. There we go. Just keep it turning, always starting in the center. If it looks like it's getting a little sticky, add just a little bit more flour. Keep some flour over in the corner. There is no need to flip it over. And never roll over the edge. That's a big no-no. What happens is it just produces an icky pie crust when you roll over the edge. I don't know why, but I've never done it, and I suggest you don't do it. Well, actually, I have done it. It wasn't pleasant. That's how I know. Okay, and we're almost there. There we are. We're getting there. But you see how the pastry moves very nicely. And I'm avoiding, even though it's getting a little sticky to the rolling pin, I'm avoiding adding more flour because it's pretty much where I want it to be. I'm going to measure it just to make sure. So I keep my pastry ruler handy for this. And so that's a 12 by 12. Spot on. Wow. That doesn't happen all the time. Okay, so I'm going to grab my glass pie shell, because this one I can use a little bit more immediately than the one that I want to store in the freezer. Now remember, it moves very nicely, so I don't have to worry about it's not stuck. Now, one way, this often gets people, how do you get the pastry shell into the pie tin without it making a total mess? Now there are two ways of doing it. You can fold it like this, and then pick it up and put it in like this and unfold it. So you would have half and you would have half. And there you are. There's a very nice way of doing it. Or you can put it on your rolling pin. And because it shrunk a little bit, just in the doing of that, I'm just going to give it a little bit of roll. This is just to show you how it's done. It did shrink just a little bit, so I'm just going to roll it back out just a bit. And also, I'm just going to rub the surface with a tiny bit of flour when you do this. Not the edges, just the surface. And I'll explain why. Pick it up on the rolling pin and fold it over. And you don't want the pastry to stick to itself. When you do that, you start doing that, pick your rolling pin up as you roll. So my rolling pin is not on the counter, because if I did, I would start to literally roll the layers together and then pick it up like this. Set your pastry pan down and kind of eyeball it and somewhere in the middle. There we are. And then roll it on just like this. And that's two ways of getting your pastry onto your pie plate. However you get it on there, be quick about it, because you don't want your pastry to start to stretch. And that gets a little icky. Okay, now the first thing you want to do is to, I've raced ahead without even telling. The first thing is to put your finger on the inside of here and flip it forward. That just makes sure that your pie crust is nestled inside your pan, just like this. Okay, and then take your edges and fold them over. Now, some people fold them forward, but I don't think that looks very pretty, so I'm just going to fold it over, just like that. Just take your fingers and you're just tucking it over. All right, and there is that. Now, you can leave this just as it is, and you don't need to do anything fancy or decorative to it. It's fine. It's ready to go. We've got it in the pie shell. We don't need to do anything more to it. Although, if you're going to blind bake it, and I am going to blind bake this pie crust, just take a fork, stick a few holes down in here. This is called docking your pastry. What this does is, because of all those nice layers that we built up when we were making our pie crust, plus the rich butter that's in here, it's going to puff up. And you don't want your middle to puff up. So just poking those holes in there, that's called docking, that prevents your pastry from puffing up as it pre-bakes. Now, how to get those pretty fluted edges. I'm just going to flour my fingers very nicely like this. I'm going to take my two fingers and my index finger, and I'm going to push just like that. Push, rotate, go to the next section, push, rotate, go to the next section, push, rotate, next, push, and just keep going around like this. You can also use the knuckle of your index finger and push. But I like to use my my index finger. I think it just looks a lot prettier if you use your index finger. And there we are. And there you have a fluted pie shell. And it's ready to chill and go before you blind bake it. You do need to chill this completely. Now, I would let this chill at the very, very least 2 hours. The reason why you never want to bake a warm pie crust, for any reason, the butter is just going to flood right out and you end up with a tough, greasy pie. So let this chill before you ever go anywhere near the oven. All right, now it's time to roll out the second pie crust to go into the the foil pie tin. Now this is the pie tin that you can make ahead and freeze. The glass one, you just want to chill that in the fridge and then go ahead and bake your pie. But for this one, you do want to, this can be your make ahead and freeze pie. So I am going to repeat the same process like I did with the other one. All right, now let's get our measuring ruler and measure it. So we got it in there now. Just pick it up. Okay. And then no need to trim off. No need to trim. Just fold it over. If you over rolled your pie crust, it'll be too thin for one thing, and it'll just be too wide. And you're looking for a 12 by 12. It's really the size you're going for. Now you can use a simple method, which is just use a fork and poke tines all around the edge like that, and that'll give you a pretty edge. However, for this one, I'm going to do something just a little bit different. I'm going to take a spoon, a small spoon. I'm going to put a little bit of flour on the back of it. And I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to push with the spoon. Try to keep it straight. Push with the spoon. Just go all around like that. Give yourself the length of your fingers in between. Just like that. Okay. That's good, huh? I am happy with this. So this is another way that you can make a pretty decorative pie crust. And like I say, you can always just use a fork and go around the edges. That's perfectly fine too. Especially if you're doing something like a really, really rustic chicken pot pie or something. There's no need for flutes. Nobody's going to be paying attention. Another thing, if you're doing a lattice pie, there's really no need for flutes because your lattice is going to be the decoration. So you don't really want to worry about the edges. But for these pies, which are going to be open-faced pies, you do want to add, or you can add a little extra pretty around the edge. And I think that looks good. Thank you, Jesus. It smells good too. Now, get this in the fridge and let it chill before you proceed. I will be doing a series on pies, from my favorite sweet potato pies to pecan pies to chocolate pies to pumpkin pies to apple pies, all kind of pies. I'm going to be doing the pie series, so be sure to subscribe to my channel. Also, if there is a particular pie recipe, maybe it's one of those old-timey pie recipes that you have heard of, or maybe you ate years ago and you kind of want to know how to make it, leave a comment and let me know. I will be more than happy to go into the kitchen, roll up my sleeves, put on my glasses, and see if I can crack that pie code for you. So be sure to subscribe to my channel so you won't miss out anytime I upload a new pie video.